So, missile technology, whether it's throwing things or shooting things or projecting things in some other way, is designed to attack an enemy from a distance, which of course is the safest way of doing it. The furthest away your enemy is, when you take them out of the problematic equation that you're in with them, the better. So whether you're like a mean girl with a switchblade or a medieval warrior with a bow, it's pretty much the same thing. That's a great shot, isn't it? Anyway, so many of these things will have points. This is a point. This is a barbed point. And these are points. There are various scales. This one's about, shall we say, 2 centimeters across this way. And so you can see points are of various sizes. And it isn't necessarily obvious what they are attached to. They're clearly attached to something. They have all the attributes. This might not be, but it probably is. Attached, mounted to a shaft of some sort. This thing, shall we say a harpoon, you probably want to put that on a spear and throw it. And these also maybe darts or throwing spears. This could be a throwing spear. This is about the size of an arrowhead. And so for many of these things, the best we can do is say, well, that looks about the size of an arrowhead. So spears, spear technology, you basically have a point on a long pole. The problem with how this chap is using it is, of course, he now no longer has a spear. He threw it away. Of course, the other chap with the axe isn't very happy, but if the chap with the axe has friends, this chap, who used to have a spear when we started, will have nothing. So it's actually not a very clever thing to do with a spear. And and here we have another one. And there goes his spear, and now he doesn't have a spear. Of course, these chaps are not very happy, and unlikely, of course, he has a very nice sword. It works very well for fiction, but we know that's not true, because we watched the earlier episode about swords and spears and things. And so it doesn't really work. Of course, there may be reasons to throw your spear, like to save the maiden from being sacrificed or something. And, you know, this is like an awesome shot. But typically you want to keep it in your hands, unless it is for throwing. And there are spears designed for throwing. You have javelins and things like this. And you also have the pilum, very famous type of spear. Quite a heavy spear at the bottom. It's Roman. So you have all these Romans here, you see, Romans standing around with pilae. And the pilum is designed to bend on impact. And so it is actually meant to be thrown at people. And when it hits them, it will bend. And of course, that might not matter a lot when it goes through somebody, and you don't really care whether your pilum bends. If it hits somebody, if it's taken them out, that's the main thing. But part of the objective is actually to throw it at your adversary, and the pilum will get stuck in the shield. And so if it gets stuck in the shield, it will bend. And so it's difficult to get out because it'll have a barbed point. And it's difficult to throw back again if it has bent. It's going to do a lot less damage to you if someone throws your pilum back at you when it's got a bent end like these ones have. And so that's why the pilum was designed the way it was. But of course, the best way of fighting with a spear is to not throw it. You keep holding on to it, and you can use it both ends, and you can use it as a club, and of course you can use it to cut and thrust, and all possibly from a distance. It's even more effective. You can hide behind a shield while you're doing it. So we covered that a bit. Here are the Zulu. The Zulu are famous for developing the iklwa, which was designed for thrusting. You can see this one even has a handle on it. And so up until then, that was up until Shaka, who was the great leader of the Zulu in the 19th century, decided, all this running around throwing spears at each other was daft. What you should do is walk up to someone and stick your thrust your spear into their stomach or something. And that's how he managed to conquer so much land, is because he completely changed how warfare was done. And the thrusting spear of the Zulu was a part of that. And you can see they're still very happy with them now. And so they should be. Right. So that brings us to specifically designed throwing things. And darts, of course, could just be a light spear and you throw it, javelins, things like that. But a way of actually getting your point across, shall we say, at a greater distance, is called the atlatl. So an atlatl is actually the thing that you don't throw. It's still in this chap's hand. You see he has the atlatl, and it's actually designed to extend your arm. So you can see this chap throwing an atlatl. So you can see here, that's how much contact you have with that javelin, that dart, as you throw it by hand. But you have a lot more contact. There's more time in which you're projecting that projectile forward. And so it goes with greater force and greater speed and greater distance. And here you can see, again, that just sort of throwing over like that, and the dart goes off. So this might have been an atlatl. It's about the right size. That's a centimetre. Bit big for an arrow, but just right for an atlatl. So projectile velocity is very important. This is the how fast, and you just get like talk a policeman into loaning their velocimeter or something that they use for seeing how fast cars are going. And you see how fast projectiles go. And this is quite an old study, but still quite good. So this is an atlatl. Not very fast. This was a replica of a Subo. Don't know how what the Subo was like or how effective the replica was, but it's also not awesome. This is an African self bow. A self bow is a plain wood bow, and we'll get into that in a minute. This is a replica Apache bow, so presumably this bow is better than that bow, although I wouldn't want to speak for either Apache or Sioux or the replicas, but like that. This is a replica of Egyptian bow. I don't know if it's a Egyptian self bow or a composite bow, and what those terms mean we will cover, but clearly they're getting faster. This is a replica of a longbow, which typically means the well-known English and Welsh longbow used in the Middle Ages, which is structurally identical to ancient Egyptian self bows or wooden bows. I don't know what kind of bow this one is. And this is a replica composite recurve. So composite bows are another type of bow, which we shall cover. And this is clearly the best. And a crossbow. This is a crossbow. As you can see, it's we don't know what kind of crossbow it is. But it's a crossbow which is has much greater velocity than all these other things. But still, all these better known bows, long bows, composite recurve bows, very typical for ancient medieval times, are also very powerful, very capable things. Arrowhead types. Aren't you glad that Green Arrow doesn't usually have the noise effects? So you can have a foliate arrowhead, which is leaf-shaped. Foliate, see, leaf-shaped. Tanging is important. This is the tang, like a tongue, tanged. And with this is how you mount it to the shaft. These are tanged and barbed points. And so the idea of the barb is that once you shot it into something, it's not likely to come out again. The barbs will keep it in position. Very unpleasant. And these are tanged and barbed and serrated. So all these are arrowheads that you still get to this day. And certainly you get them throughout the archaeological record. And you have transverse heads, which you don't see too much of today, but were a big thing in the past. Here you can see this chap actually has one of these transverse heads, and he has one in his hand too. And we actually have some of these in the ROMs collection, which unfortunately I don't have a photograph of. I usually wave them at people. So, and of course there are all sorts of other shapes as well, and also teeny tiny ones. These are very small ones. They're actually rather like poison heads used by the Bushmen of South Africa. And these are kind of cool. This is somewhat reconstructed, but these long blades could have been a part of the sides of arrows, which we do have evidence for in the ethnographic record. So this relates to what arrows are meant to do. Making just a hole in somebody is so effective. What you want to do is actually make them bleed. You want the person or the animal that you're shooting bleed and eventually weaken and die. And so you want the arrow to cut through arteries as it goes through the body. And so all of these are designed for that cutting action, and probably cut even more if it's stuck in them because of the barbs. So all of these edges, and remember the serrated ones from the slide before, are all designed to increase the cutting as it goes into the body. And these long blades along the side of the arrow would do exactly that as it passes into the body, which would explain these if they are in fact poison heads, which is just basically to get the poison into the body and not to cut people up. So experimental archaeology is a lot of fun with archery. So here you have this person has hung up this dead animal, I think it's a deer, and is shooting them with arrows to see how they break, to see if they break the same way that the prehistoric lithics break, to say, oh yes, so this must have been used as an arrow because of the nature of the impacts. Called burin-like breaks here. A burin is actually a graver used for engraving things, but these breaks may actually not be burins, but because they were shot at something. These are some very early ones, 279,000 BP. People have been looking at and suggesting that these breaks are from being used as projectiles. However, looking at the fracture velocity, which they felt they could calculate, these are their points, and this is an arrow. And this is a dart, and this is a javelin. So maybe they were javelins. Whereas a spear, as such, is actually very slow. And this is what a hard hammer would look like. So it does actually more like a javelin than something that's been deliberately done. Possibly. And here are some also very old, not as old, but still very old points that have been hypothesized as being early arrowheads. This is another very early arrowhead from South Africa, which is made of bone. And these people actually did replication experiments to see how they worked, and they seem to work very well. So that brings us to the main parts of the bow. So just like you, a bow will have a belly, a back, and limbs. And just like you, it bends in the direction of its belly. So it might be somewhat confusing that its back is turned towards the person you're shooting at, which you think would be unlikely, but that is what it's called. This is the back on this side, and it bends in towards the belly. This is the belly side. Okay, so that's the back, that's the belly, and these are the limbs. Also, these are the ears, often called. So the back, this side, is under tension, or this side. So this is under tension on this side. And the belly, that's this side, is under compression, because you're like got the straight thing and you're pulling it in that way. So this is compressed and this is tense. And so you will often cut the wood so that it works better with having this side being tense and this side being compressed. This is a composite recurve bow, See, composite bow, recurved. You see it's recurved, and then curved the other way, it's recurved. And it's composite because it's made up of different materials, which I get to in a minute. And so it's designed so that the stuff on the back is better for tension, the stuff on the belly is better for compression. So, the main types of bow, it has is a self bow, is the simple bow, which is just a piece of wood and a string and an arrow, and there you go. That's a self bow. This is constructed entirely of wood. And you have a composite bow, which is typically made of wood, horn, sinew, and lacquer. So it'll have a wooden core and horn. And the horn is better at compression, so it's on the belly. And sinew. So sinew is the long muscles of large animals like ox, cattle, which have been taken off the animal to start with, and then dried and combed so that it forms these long fibers. And then it is glued to this side. And of course, it's very good for tension. And lacquer is what keeps it all together. It's glue, which you made by boiling other trees. And you can have a backed bow. So a backed bow is a simple wooden bow, but has something attached, glued to the back using lacquer. Okay, so that could in fact be sinew. So it's just a wooden bow with some sinew on it, or it could be a textile material or something like that, or it could be another type of wood even. And so those are the three main types of bow. Another important aspect of bows is their draw weight. Now, the draw weight is how much weight it takes to draw it to its draw length. So a draw length is how far back you draw the bow. Now, this is different for different bows and where you want to draw it back to. Like some you might draw back to your chin, some you might draw back to your ear, depending on the style of archery you're being done. So the actual draw length is dependent on that. So in this case, what they're doing is they're drawing it down from a scale. How this would be done traditionally is the other way around, where you would hang weights from the string, and you hang more and more weights until it reaches its draw length. So this is 28-inch draw length, so they're drawing it back 27 inches in this case. I thought you'd actually drew it back to its full draw length, but never mind. And how much weight that has created is the draw weight of the bow. And of course, as I'm sure you've worked out by now, that is a calculation of how powerful that bow is. Yeah, draw weight, I told them that. So a competition bow like this is typically about 35 to 55 pounds. Hunting bows are typically about 45 pounds, bows like this. The long bow, the traditional bow of the English and Welsh in the medieval period, later medieval period especially, was recorded as being about 150 to 160 pounds. Although there have been bows said to be up to 200 pounds, so it depends how big you want your bow to be. Mongol war bows are thought to be about 166 pounds. So here's a Mongol with his bow. So you can see this is a composite recurve, and the straight bit here is solid wood and is called in Arabic the sia, the ears. So that's about 166 pounds. So these are war bows. This is the sort of thing you want to use for shooting people, and they can still be very accurate. These chaps here trained until they could shoot an open hand, something the size of an open hand, at 100 strides, 100 yards, 100 meters sort of distance. And the horse archers of Mongolia and the Turkic steppes And the Scythians probably would be just as accurate, and probably while at a full gallop. So, lifted this from a movie. I won't say which one it is in case Disney go after me. But it's probably the best depiction of archery I can find, other than recording myself. And since it's snowing now, I can't do that. So here you can see she has a bow, and it looks like it's a self bow, but it's been bent. We'll cover how you can do that. And she has an arrow, and she's knocking the arrow and drawing the bow. What's really good about this is her stance is perfect. You see her arm is straight, at right angles to the bow. Her arm comes back straight there, and just the tips of her fingers are drawing on the string. You don't want to like grasp it with your fist. One problem is you'll see that this arrow has white fletching and barred fletching. You see that? See that she's releasing it? But what you should see, this is the barred one is actually called the cock feather. And it should be away from the bow. See, it has a triangular shape usually, and what you want is for it to be an arrow up and an arrow down, and the other arrow points away, which should be the cock feather, so you know which way it goes. But that's one actually problem with this. So you see tips of her fingers, and she releases it, and it's off. And you see how it's starting to curve around the bow, which you can see a bit better here. Oh no, this is the release is better. Yeah, see the release, just the tips of her fingers. This is actually a very good rendition of a medieval attachment of the fletching to the shaft of the arrow, that it's tied on and probably glued as well. So this is demonstrating the archer's paradox. So on a traditional bow like this, actually her wrist should be a bit straighter, but never mind. The archer's paradox is that you aren't aiming at the target. You may be shooting at it, but you're not pointing the bow at it, because the arrow has to get around the bow. So if you look at this diagram, see here is the bow. Imagine this is the bow. This is where you've drawn the arrow back to. The red thing is obviously the arrow, and you're shooting at B. And so you can see the bow is in the way. If you look at modern target arrows, it doesn't work like that. Target bows, they have a cutout, and so you are actually shooting the arrow right at the target, which makes it easier. But traditional bows are shot in the traditional way, which is you practice and practice and practice until you can hit it. Rather like throwing a stone. And you don't aim a stone, you just know what you're aiming, where you're hitting. After practice, after throwing a lot of stones, ever since you're able to pick something up and throw it. And so when you release the arrow, it has to get around the bow, you see, because the string pulls it towards the bow. You see, so the string has brought the arrow closer, but it's actually pointing further away from the target. And so it has to adjust itself. And this is a very important aspect of getting things right with archery, is that the arrow must have the right spine. And that means the spine is how stiff the arrow is. Because if it has too little spine, it will bend too much. And the spine is related to the draw weight of the bow. And so with too little spine, it will bend too much and not hit it. If it has too much spine, it won't bend enough and it will go off over here somewhere. You want it to have just the right amount of spine for that bow, so it comes out, wiggles a bit, and ends up going where you want it to. What will help will be to have arrows which twirl around. See how this one's twirling around? And so this is one of the things that helps it straighten out and hit what you're aiming at. So this is straight fletching. This is helical fletching, which will help with the making it twirl around as it goes. And this is flu-flu fletching. I just let you know there is such a thing as flu-flu fletching. So these are some very early arrows. They're from like 9000 BC. So that would be Mesolithic from Germany, Stele. And you can see that these are arrows, and they're associated with points like this. And they have nocks that would be for the string. This is an early bow, the Holmgard marsh bow from Denmark. This is what we would call a flat bow because it is flat. It is a self bow, which means it is made of wood. This is Ötzi's bow. Remember Ötzi from the Swiss Italian Alps? He had a nice self bow and a whole bunch of arrows, and I'd highly recommend you watch those videos in the recommended section for you to find out how they were made. There's another bow found there. There's a big thing in archaeology now of looking at glaciers because of global warming. A lot of glaciers are melting that have not melted in thousands of years. And so things are coming out of the glaciers. Ötzi possibly may have been one of these things. But up in Scandinavia and up in the Arctic of Canada, and also in the mountains, glaciers melt and things come out of them, like this very cool bow case. See, this is a self bow as well, and its arrows. And they were in a case made of birch bark. And this is what the bow, the profile, the D-shaped profile. This would be the back of the bow, and this would be the belly because this is better for tension. And this is a longbow. So longbows aren't an invention of the English in the late medieval period. It's just a simple self bow. I'll tell you why it became important when we get to that. I think that's the next lecture. So this is the Amesbury archer, which is also from England, and he's also very interesting because he had earrings and things, but also all these arrows. He was an archer, and these are thought to be wrist guards. See, one is still attached to his wrist. This is another early bow. A lot of them seem to be from wet areas, okay? So that's why there's so much English, European stuff. This is another flat bow, the Mere Heath bow. And, okay, now we're sort of in the Middle East. This is North Africa, where we have some very early evidence of archery. And here we have someone, also early evidence of clothing, possibly. We have this chap running around, nice curve of a self bow with a quiver full of arrows here, and he's chasing after something or other in the Sahara. Where nowadays it's like desert and you wouldn't want to go there. So the tomb of Tutankhamun had a lot of bows. Egypt was big on bows, and they had a lot. And this is actually a composite bow, but it's not a recurve. This is the composite bow of 3,000 years ago and more. These are self bows. These are traditional bows from the Nile region, whereas these were probably imported from Asia, along with chariots. So I was telling you about that person from that unnamed Disney movie having what seemed to be a self bow that was bent. This is a thing, and you saw a lot of those self bows from Tutankhamun's tomb where it was bent. And of course you can easily bend wood, you steam it. So you put it over a pot of water, you got the water all hot, and you steam the wood, and then you bend it over a form. And so you can take a straight bow like this and turn it into a curved bow like this, which will make it a better bow to shoot things with. These chaps are actually making composite bows, because you can see it has that the curve of an early composite bow. These are the earliest evidence for composite bows is actually from Asia, Western Asia, and we find them in Egypt after the introduction of these things, which they're not just wheels; they're actually chariots, parts of chariots. These are parts of chariots, and so the archery with the chariots came in as a package at the same time. So here you can see there's like going on making things here, and this guy's pulling the bow to see if it's the right thingy, and this guy's looking at arrows because you need to make sure your arrows are straight. And so here we have an Egyptian production center. So here, you've seen this chap before, this is Naram-sin. So this is actually the earliest evidence we have for a composite bow, because he seems to have one. It looks like this is a composite recurve, in fact. which he used to conquer the mountains and shoot people with these absurdly large arrows. Back to the tomb of Tutankhamun, these are the composite bows. And you can see they actually bend back that way, because they sort of look like arrows that you shoot this way. And that this is the back and this is the belly, but it's actually the other way around. This is the back and this is the belly. So how you make a composite bow, I stole these off the web from a chap that makes composite bows. And he's using water buffalo. Okay, and they're just sort of sitting here, waiting to be used. And so he's making a Turkic style bow. He has wood, which makes the core, and horn, and sinew. So this is what the sinew looks like, you see, after you've taken a big chunk of meat off of a long-limbed animal and let it dry and combed it out, so it forms this fiber, and that you glue to the outside, okay, the back of the bow, whereas the horn is glued to the inside, the belly of the bow. And of course this is curving in the opposite direction, so you're thinking, what the hell is going on here? But these limbs are pulled all the way back, and the arrow goes shooting out that way, you see. Okay, but these are the components, and this is them all stuck together. So here you can see he's gluing the sinew. Here he's filing it away. You see? So this takes a long time. After you made it for a certain amount, you let it season for a year. So he's pulling it into the stringing position. And this form he's using to shape the bow. And he's drawing it. You just like start off little at a time, because you don't want to like snap it or something, find out you've made a mistake and the whole thing breaks, because a sufficiently powerful bow will break your ribs when it falls apart. In fact, there's a saying amongst people who make bows that you're not truly a bow maker until you've broken a rib, which is one of the reasons I don't make bows. Yeah, so he's just trying it out now. One of the things you want to make sure is that it draws evenly. And so after drawing it, you think, oh no, I need a bit more fining away at this side until it's finished. Right. And so Lukas Novotny is actually a very accomplished horse archer himself. And here you can see he's like shooting from a horse. And I actually had the opportunity to do this with him. I did this TV show in 2009, very dreadful series of television shows called Ancients Behaving Badly. This was on Genghis Khan. You might be able to find them on YouTube or something. And there are parts of it made in lots of different places, and there was a Canadian contingent that made parts of it. And they kept getting me to do things, and one of them was this, in which I was talking about the longbow. See, I have a longbow, and he has, Lukas has one of these recurve bows. And the fun part of it was, we were just showing how they both work, was when I got to show how a longbow doesn't work on a horse. Because you really need a short bow on a horse, because if you don't, you can't do this thing you do where you shoot forward and you can shoot back. You can only shoot sideways. And because if otherwise you just like prod the horse in all sorts of uncomfortable places, which it's not expecting, and leads to a bad idea. And so I was trying to tell them what you need is actually me doing it twice, same person, because that's science, that's consistency. This is the same archer using a longbow who cannot actually get more than one shot off because of the nature of the bow, and then with the same archer with a recurve, a short bow, being able to shoot once forward, once sideways, and once backwards as he gallops, or she gallops, depending on who they are. It's me, so it's a he. As they gallop past the target. And so I was very disappointed when, as I actually got my horse bow and gave it another go and did an excellent job of shooting forward, shooting sideways, shooting backwards, and then I noticed they were packing up the camera and walking away. So that never got into the thing. They just have Lukas Novotny, so it's not good science, but it's fine. So that's it for our introduction to missiles.